Hi there, this is Solitaire Ronan from Solitaire Ronan Films, and welcome to a complete collection video. I now have all the 101 Films Black Label collection, and I've watched them all, so I can actually comment on how they are. The 101 Black Label collection is pretty much similar to their Red Label in the fact that it's a bit of a mixed bag, but what kind of makes the Black Label stand out a little bit, apart from the fact they're numbered, the fact that we're only up to 15, which is probably why I've got the complete set, because it's not 312 titles. But even if the film doesn't particularly take your fancy, the extras are usually really good. They do new retrospective makings of and new commentaries and things like that. So even films that might not seem that interesting end up being well worth picking up. So I'm just going to go through the whole collection of all 15 and just give a kind of overview, talk about the extras. So number 1 is the Grifters, and you get the spine number and also the date of production. I did a video on the Grifters as a neglected gem, Stephen Frears film from 1990, and again you usually get a nice booklet with nice pictures and essays. This is a really interesting kind of neo-noir that if it was directed by somebody else it would probably be a completely different film, but it's more character based and it's less about a big heist. So if you're looking for Ocean's 14, it's not quite that film. Usually they come on dual format, Blu-ray and DVD, sometimes just a Blu-ray. The Grifters has a brand new feature-length documentary on the film's production, which is fantastic. The film for me is a 4 out of 5, but that the making of is really informative. It features Stephen Frears, the DP, the editor, the executive producer and the co-producer, and again the booklet has essays in it. So that's number 1, the Grifters. Number 2 is Cronenberg's Existenz. As far as I know, certainly in Region B, I think this is the only Blu-ray of Existenz. Again, it's spine number 2 from 1999. This is one of Cronenberg's most underrated films, I think, and kind of neglected films. Again, we get a nice booklet. It's another example of Cronenberg being ahead of the curve as far as game development, as far as virtual reality. It's also a wonderful satire on the kind of test audience, that whole concept. Because at the end of the film he has the actors pretty much talking about their performances in the film as they come out of the game. You know, Ian Holm, who's famous for having the occasional dodgy accent, asks about his accent. Christopher Eccleston complains that his character, all he did was give exposition. It's one of Cronenberg's funniest films. Willem Dafoe kind of turns up and gives a wonderful little cameo. I would say, obviously, if you're a Cronenberg fan, this is a must own. But even a casual film fan, this would be one of the 101 Black Labels I would recommend picking up. This has new extras. It's got an interview with Christopher Eccleston, which is very good. It's got a commentary with Kim Newman and Ryan Lambie, and Kim Newman's always fantastic. There's a commentary with Mondo Digital's Nathan Thompson, and again there's a booklet, and one of the essays is actually with Denise Cronenberg's sister, who did do costume design for most of his films, who sadly died fairly recently. And there's also a commentary with Cronenberg. There's a making of, promo featurette, and backstage interviews from the making of the film with Jude Law, Jennifer Jason Leigh and Cronenberg. So this is one of the titles that I would certainly recommend picking up. Again, as you'll see, it's kind of a mixed bag of titles. There's ones that I wouldn't necessarily tell you to rush out and buy, but if the titles intrigue you, then they're always worth a look. Spine number 3 from 1977 is Roller Coaster. And this is a perfect example of sometimes the extras being slightly more interesting than the film. The film is one of those examples of the 70s disaster films. This one's about a guy threatening to blow up a roller coaster. Strangely enough, Richard Widmark's in it. Richard Widmark seemed to be in all the 70s disaster films. George Segal's in it. I mean, it's a nice little film, but what makes it again, this one's dual format, but what kind of makes it is there's a new documentary called The 70s, A Roller Coaster of Disasters, which is about the whole era of disaster movies in the 70s, which is excellent. There's also a commentary, and again there's a couple of essays in the booklet. So that's an example of one of the films that perhaps isn't the greatest film ever made, but for me it's certainly worth having just for that documentary on 70s disaster films. Number 4 is Paul Verhoeven's Black Book from 2006. This is the only film that has subtitles in the Black Label collection. Again, it's probably because it's Verhoeven that it's in here. Black Book is, you could make the argument it's Verhoeven's best looking film. Certainly on Blu-ray it does look rather gorgeous. This is him getting back to his Dutch roots, because he says himself that after Hollow Man he kind of felt that he was doing these special effects films and it wasn't really him, it was just he did it because the studio wanted him to do it and he was available to do it. But after Hollow Man he kind of took a little bit of time out for self-reflection and decided to actually try and do films that were character driven rather than kind of special effects driven. So Black Book, it's not perfect, but it's really good. It's almost like The Army of Shadows by Jean-Pierre Melville, but obviously a few rungs down from The Army of Shadows, which is next level territory. But again, Verhoeven kind of shows the complexity of the underground, the resistance, collaboration, how there's sometimes the thin line between collaborating and being in the resistance. So he doesn't shy away from that. There's a great scene with a pot full of excrement. Yeah, it's well mounted, well acted. I would say the score is a little bit overly melodramatic. It could have did with perhaps a little bit of a kind of more subtle score. But I really enjoyed it. And again, the extras, there's a new interview with Paul Verhoeven on Black Book, which is excellent. Verhoeven's one of those guys you could just listen to all day long, because he kind of talks about trying to find himself again after doing kind of a bit too many special effects things. There's also an interview with the cinematographer, Carl Walter Lindenlob. And again, there's a couple of essays, and there's also an interview with the lead actress Carice Van Houten from 2006, and an interview with Paul Verhoeven from 2006. And the trailer, if you like to have your sets with trailers. So that's number 4, Black Book. Number 5 is Walter Hill's Daft But Fun Trespass from 1992. I mean, look at that amazing cast. Bill Paxton, it's still hard to believe Bill Paxton's not with us anymore. Ice-T, William Sadler, and another subtle moving performance by Ice Cube. It's essentially the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, but in a burnt out factory in a part of town nobody wants to go to. Bill Sadler and Bill Paxton play firemen who find this treasure map, but when they go to find it, it ends up it's in the middle of gangland, set in East St. Louis. It's daft, but if you're in the right mood, it's a bit of fun. Again, this one's dual format, and the extras again are actually very good. There's a commentary with Joel McIver and Angus Beattie. There's a commentary with Nathaniel Thompson and Howard S. Berger. Again, there's 2 essays in the booklet, and there's interviews with the producer. There's a great interview with William Sadler, and an interview with the co-writer Bob Gale. So again, not the greatest film ever made, but a bit of daft fun. And again, I think that's the only Region B Blu-ray edition you're going to find. Next is number 6 from 2003, which is The Cooler, starring William H. Macy, Maria Bello and Alec Baldwin. And it's a really nice little character film about a guy who's hired by a casino to put people off their hot streaks. But his son turns up, his estranged son turns up, and that leads to complications. Alec Baldwin has fun as the heavy. And this one, which is a really good film, which again was kind of forgotten about after it got released. The special features in this one's really good, again dual format, because this one has a feature-length commentary about the making of, which is excellent, about Wayne Kramer and his kind of journey to making films, and the whole making of process excuse me, is fascinating for this one, and it's well worth picking up almost just for that feature length making of. Again, there's essays in the booklet, there's a commentary with Wayne Kramer and the composer, there's a commentary with Wayne Kramer and the cinematographer, deleted scenes, there's featurettes, trailers and promos. So that's another one that I would say is well worth your time in picking it up. Again, even if you don't like the film, the feature-length making of is fascinating. Number 7 from 1982 is The Class of 1984, which again is one of those films that doesn't immediately pique your interest. I think it was one of the last ones that I picked up. However, because of Roddy McDowall's performance as the biology teacher, the film does have a heart. It's about a teacher who ends up getting into trouble with some kids because they're rough. Granted, they do such dastardly things that, strangely enough, you just want them to find their end, which I suppose is not what you're supposed to say, but they do some things that are just out of order. So there's not a lot of subtlety to it. Directed by Mark L. Lester, or the less successful Lester. But again, the extras are really good. There's an interview with Tom Holland, who wrote it. Again, there's essays, there's a commentary with Mark Lester, there's a career retrospective of Perry King, who plays the teacher. There's an interview with Mark Lester and composer Lalo Schifrin. There's interviews with cast and crew. So again, not the greatest film ever made, but Roddy McDowall's performance is worth checking out. It's funny because they kind of say during the making of, they'd made the school so there's like metal detectors, and of course at the time when they made it, it was like, oh yeah, having metal detectors in schools, that would be like so futuristic and crazy. And of course, look where we are today. Next is probably the most infamous one in the catalogue, and that's Howard the Duck from 1986. Spine number 8. This proves that Marvel weren't always a success at the box office. This is George Lucas's huge misfire. He was originally going to make it himself, but he got somebody else to direct it, and people just didn't really get it at the time. I mean, it is not a great film. You could argue it's not even a good film. But I'll tell you what, I would much rather watch Howard the Duck again than, say, Aquaman or Batman versus Superman, or, no, that's not a Marvel, that's DC, but it's an interesting little failure, but again, to me it's more interesting than a lot of the Marvel films that are just a bit dull. But what's really good on this one, again, you're not going to rush out and buy this edition, but there's a really good documentary called Howard, a Cult Hero, or New Cult Hero, by Vic Pratt, and he actually talks about what the comic strip character was like, and how if George Lucas had actually hired the right people, they might have got the character right, because the character was not, strangely enough, a lot more political than it ends up in the film. The film is like a neutered duck. It's kind of the neutered version of what the comic book actually is. So once again, Hollywood kind of goes, oh yeah, we really like that edgy kind of comic book character, let's make a film of it, but then of course let's take all the edginess out and all the kind of socio-political commentary out of it, and let's kind of make something a bit more box office friendly, and of course it just doesn't really work. But that documentary is really good, and it gives you an idea of the roots of the character. And as Vic Pratt says, it's probably somebody could actually remake it and reboot it and do it properly. But of course, because of this film's reputation, they're probably never going to do that. Even though 35 years later, looking at it, it's not that bad a film. You know, there is way worse films than Howard the Duck, but again, the perception is, oh, Howard the Duck is one of the worst films ever made. And it's like, well, if you actually watch it, it's not really. There's a commentary, there's two commentaries. Again, essays. There's a documentary. And again, there's stunt, special effects, music, featurettes. So it's a film. Does it deserve its reputation as one of the worst films ever made? I don't actually think so. In the 35 years since Howard the Duck, there's a hell of a lot worse films been made. So from Howard the Duck to Cronenberg's Rabid from 1977. This is spine number 9. Of course, Rabid is available on Arrow Video, which I have. But again, this one has a nice booklet. Nazarene Prod and myself, who have a podcast, Ronan Nazarene Talks, our last video was about Cronenberg, career retrospective. And we both kind of agreed that, correct me if I'm wrong, but Rabid isn't one of our favourite Cronenbergs. I think we both prefer Shivers as far as his early funny films. But Rabid is still well worth seeing if you haven't seen it before. And this is a very nice addition. Again, this has A Quiet Revolution, State Society and the Canadian Horror Film, Part 1, which is just awesome. It's a great documentary about the history of Canadian horror and tax shelters and stuff like that. There's a commentary with the Soska sisters, who did their own reboot quite recently. Again, there's new essays in the booklet. There's also a commentary with Cronenberg. There's a commentary with William Beard, who wrote The Artist as Monster of the Cinema of Cronenberg. There's another commentary with Chelsea Nelson, who's the author of Golden Goddesses, 25 Legendary Women of Classic Erotic Cinema 1968 to 1985, and Marilyn Chambers' Personal Appearances manager, Ken Lisht. There's an interview with Susan Roman, who was in the film, and there's an archive interview with David Cronenberg, and there's a 1999 documentary about Cronenberg. So I mean, again, even if you're not the biggest fan of Rabid, there's a ton of really good extras in that. Again, any time you can get a commentary with Cronenberg, it's well worth checking out, because Cronenberg is one of those guys that his commentaries are absolutely wonderful. Because Cronenberg most of the time is the smartest guy in the room, but he never comes across as knowing that he's the smartest guy in the room. He has a great sense of humour. He's just a wonderful, wonderful man. Next is number 10 from 1993, and this is Skinner, starring Tracy Lords, Ted Raimi and Ricky Lake. I know what you're thinking, what a wonderful combination. Why have I not seen more films with Ted Raimi, Tracy Lords and Ricky Lake? This is a low budget slasher that's very strange, but again, given wonderful treatment, you could argue perhaps better treatment than it deserves. Ted Raimi swings for the fences as a guy who, strangely enough, skins people and likes to wear their skins. Again, it's another film influenced by Ed Gein. Add it to the list. Yeah, so there's a booklet which includes the screenplay if you're that way inclined. There's an interview with the director, Ivan Nagy, which is a lot of fun. There's an interview with Ted Raimi. There's an interview with the screenwriter and the editor. It's only 73 minutes long. Doesn't need to be any longer. It's quite slow in places, but it's also kind of creepy and disturbing in other places. I won't give too much away, but if you like your odd serial killer films, it's well worth checking out. That's Skinner from 1993, and that's spine number 10. Spine number 11 is Prom Night from 1980, which is a slasher starring Jamie Lee Curtis and Leslie Nielsen. Yes, it's Leslie Nielsen in a straight role, which again is always a little bit off-putting. Excuse me. Again, this isn't the best slasher ever made, but it's got Jamie Lee Curtis, who's always worth watching, and Leslie Nielsen. There he is, being serious. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of slashers, so it's not my... For some reason that's just a single, not dual format, unlike Jamie Lee Curtis. There's brand new extras, which is a new documentary about the final girl in horror films, which is possibly better than the actual film. There's an interview with Paul Lynch. There's a commentary with Fright Fest Paul McAvoy and filmmaker Jake West. Again, there's essays. In the booklet, there's an audio commentary with Paul Lynch and the screenwriter, and there's a making of featurette and additional scenes. So again, this one I would say is one of the examples in the 101 Black Films collection that the extras are probably more interesting than the film. It's an okay slasher, but it's not anything game changing. Next is one of my favourite horrible films of all time. It's Phase 4, which is spine number 12 from 1974. The only film opening title sequence legend Saul Bass ever directed. It's an odd one, and it's quite a disturbing one if you don't like creepy crawlies. It's about scientists studying ants, even though it turns out the ants may be studying the scientists. How it ever got made is just a bit bizarre, because it doesn't really strike you as box office smash, but it's just so good. Again, this is the only region, well, that's a lie, because I had a Spanish Blu-ray of it, plus the other, I'll get to the extras in a second. This edition, I was so pleased that when they finally released it, the artwork's fantastic in it, and the extras are wonderful. There's original Saul Bass ending plus optional commentary. There's an ant's life contextualising Phase 4. There's a commentary with film historians Alan Bryce and Richard Hollis. There's a limited edition booklet, and the second disc is short films by Saul Bass. So we have The Searching Eye from 1964, Why Man Creates from 1968, Bass on Titles from 1977, Notes on the Popular Arts from 1978, The Solar Film from 1980, and Quest from 1984. So I mean, this is one of the ones I would recommend picking up. They've done a really nice job with the film, the artwork's beautiful, even on the discs, and the extras are excellent. So this is one I would definitely recommend picking up. It's one of those little films that kind of gets forgotten about, but it's really interesting, really strange. Next is Spy number 13 from 1995. This is Screamers with Peter Weller. I remember this film when it came out, but I never had it up until I picked this up. It's a low budget science fiction. You can tell it's a low budget science fiction. Its influences are in Terminator and but it's actually a really nice little film, considering it was made for not a lot. It's a great film, no. I mean, this edition for somebody has the most basic artwork. There's no inner sleeve design on this one, just one disc. But again, the extras, there's a commentary with Kevin Lyons. Again, there's essays in the booklet. Should just wear a t-shirt with his essays in the booklet. There's an interview with director Christian Duguay. There's an interview with Tom Berry, who did the music. There's an interview with the co-writer, and there's an interview with Jennifer Rubin. Jessica Rubin is her sister. It's a fun little science fiction horror. And another interesting performance by Peter Weller. Next is Spy number 14, 1985, The New Kids, by Friday the 13th Sean S. Cunningham. Again, this is a fun little film about kids fighting bad kids. But this really kind of elevates for a couple of reasons. One is it's about a couple of kids who are army brats whose father is Tom Atkins, who's only in the film for about 5 minutes because he dies after going to Washington to get a medal. Again, basic box. So they are relocated to Florida to their uncle, who has this kind of small fairground, and they kind of go to school and get on the wrong side of a gang of youths who look a lot older than they should really be in school. But the reason for picking this up, if you're a fan of James Spader, or you just want to see an early example of an actor just swinging for the fences, he's amazing as the leader of the gang. He's bleach blonde hair, so he just looks completely strange because we're just used to seeing James Spader with dark hair, but he just looks weird. It really brings out his eyes. He goes for full psycho in this film. You know, the rest of his crew are kind of Florida country trash, but James Spader looks as though he's just stepped out of Miami Vice. He wears like silk shirts, and he's kind of he does drug deals on the side, but we never find out where he gets the drugs from. So he's kind of this Miami Vice villain, this psychopath who would actually fit in with a Michael Mann Miami Vice episode. But he just goes full blown psycho. There's times that the camera even lingers on his face for a little bit too long, just because he is just going full psychopath. It's an amazing performance. And also at the end of the film, excuse me, when they have the showdown at the fairground, Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th roots come in, and there's some really spectacular slasher kills which don't really fit in with the rest of the film, but it's just... But again, this is another example. The extras is an interview with Sean Cunningham, and he explains that they pretty much had 2 weeks to prep this, because the studio just came to him and said, oh, we need a film to come out like in however long. So they had like 2 weeks. So he got like 5 different writers just to come up with a script, and he would just pick the best one. And one of those writers was Stephen Gyllenhaal, who of course is the father of Maggie and Jake Gyllenhaal, who's done a lot of TV directing and stuff like that. And there's an interview with him, which is very entertaining as well. But it's literally, we need to make a film, we need to start in 2 weeks. How do we start from scratch? It's a fascinating interview, how kind of low budget films work or get started. So I would recommend picking up just for that. I would recommend picking up for the sudden kind of change in the last 15 minutes when it turns into like slasher kills everywhere, and for James Spader's just out of this world performance. I mean, he kills a rabbit, he sprays a girl with lighter fluid. I mean, he's acting as if this is going to be his last film. He's just like, I'm going for it. It's just amazing to watch. And finally, Spy Number 15, which is their most recent release, is Split Second from 1992 with Rutger Hauer. This is Blade Runner crossed with Alien and The Thing. Again, this is a perfect example of a low budget film using lots of influences and kind of working, kind of not working. The dialogue is pretty terrible. You have Alan Armstrong and Pete Postlethwaite. This is dual format. They seem to have stopped doing internal artwork in the last three. The dialogue is just not good. It's kind of a mess, but there's something kind of endearing about it as well. Again, the extras are wonderful. It's a commentary with a couple of film historians. There's a 27-minute interview with the producer Laura Gregory and Alistair Duncan, who plays Rutger Hauer's sidekick, which is fantastic. And again, you learn about how to make a low budget film. So again, even if you're not a huge fan of the film, the special features are wonderful, because again, it's about how do you make a low budget film. You need to find locations, you don't have huge budgets. I mean, it's supposed to take place in 2008, deep into the future, and London's flooded, so they have like a flooded set, even though it's pretty much just like a few inches of water, but it's flooded, and it's actually quite effective. I mean, the production design's pretty good considering not a lot of budget. There's a 22-minute interview with Stephen Parsons, who did the music. There's a 23-minute interview with the line producer. I'm still not sure what a line producer does. There's a 32-minute interview with the creature effects designer, which is wonderful. There's an 18-minute interview with the cinematographer. Again, there's essays, and then there's archival. So the extras in this, the extras are on a separate disc because there's that many of them. Again, if you're wanting a kind of history lesson and also a lesson in how to make low budget films, the extras on this are really informative and wonderful. The film, again, if you watch it late at night and you're not too critical, it's a bit of fun. It kind of shot for the stars but didn't quite make it, but there is a bit of charm to it. Rutger Hauer's Rutger Hauer. So that's the complete 101 Black Label collection, because Rolling has 15. Not sure what number 16 is going to be. Again, there's some that I would recommend you pick up. Others are to your own taste, but generally the extras in the making of the retrospective documentaries are really good, and they really do put the effort in. So please let me know which Black Label titles you have, which ones you're intrigued by, and which ones you wouldn't go near with a barge pole. And hopefully you'll join me again for more videos. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying have a good day and farewell.